Have you ever noticed that sometimes the very people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us the most? It's painful to admit, but the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from family. Many believe blood is enough to guarantee respect, but the harsh truth is this: without daily dignity and decency, even the strongest bonds can snap. It sounds counterintuitive, but the humiliation we endure inside our own homes can sometimes be the very push we need to find our freedom. And that's exactly what happened to me. I, a devoted father and loving grandfather, suddenly found myself forbidden from seeing my own grandchildren. A wound so deep that only someone who's been rejected by family can truly understand. But what looked like the end became an unexpected beginning, because when the silence of pain collides with the courage of justice, something powerful is born, the chance to turn the tables. What you're about to hear is not just a story of revenge, but of transformation. At the courthouse, in front of everyone, my daughter thought she was about to win. What she didn't know was that a single clause had the power to shatter her pride, and through tears, deliver life's most important lesson. I never imagined I'd live to hear such words from my own daughter. With a cold stare, Victoria told me I could no longer see my grandchildren, Mason and Ella. The blow hit me like someone ripping the sound from my saxophone in the middle of a performance. It was more than betrayal. It was a silent humiliation. This wasn't just about being a grandfather. It was about being erased from my own family's story. And anyone who's been through this knows it's not just rejection. It feels like losing a piece of your soul. When the door shut behind me, the click of the lock felt like a final sentence. Every step I took down the sidewalk dragged an invisible weight, a heavy emotion clinging to me like a shadow. Family pain multiplies in ways nothing else can. If it had been a stranger saying those words, I would have laughed and walked away. But when it comes from your own blood, it cuts 10 times deeper. It's like teaching someone dignity and respect, only to have them spit in the very dish they were fed from. That's when betrayal becomes truly cruel. I walked out with my head down, but not defeated. I wasn't young enough for tantrums, nor foolish enough to argue. Revenge, I realized, didn't need to come through shouting or fighting. Revenge could be silent, carefully designed, crafted to teach. Life has a way of testing us. You spend decades preaching respect, showing through actions the value of kindness and family, and suddenly you face the ultimate exam to see if what you taught still has a place in your own home. It's like stepping on stage only to find the audience no longer believes in you. I could have exploded. I could have said things that would make Victoria break down in tears right there, but I didn't. I had learned that dignity is the highest form of freedom. When you keep your composure, you prove you're not a slave to the moment's emotion. Think about it. How many times have you lashed out in anger, only to regret it later? I've been there too, and every time I exploded, I lost more than I gained. But that day, something inside me shifted. Instead of a show of rage, I chose silence, and that silence would become the first note of the music I had yet to compose. I won't lie, it hurt, it cut deep. When a child denies you something, it doesn't just wound the present, it stabs at the past. I remembered the nights I played smoky bars until dawn, just to pay for her school. I remembered the instruments I sold to put food on the table. I remembered the life lessons I tried to pass on, about respect, about family, about how education opens doors money alone never can. And yet, the very daughter who grew up on those lessons was the one denying me time with my grandchildren. That's the kind of humiliation only those who live it can understand. But here's the thing, life is wise. Sometimes it's in the fall that we discover our freedom. I realized I could turn that pain into something bigger. And let me give you this advice. When someone close wounds you, instead of surrendering to anger, turn it into fuel. Write, play, work, create. Don't let revenge consume you. Let it inspire you. When I walked out of Victoria's house, I wasn't just carrying the weight of rejection. I carried a spark that pushed me to open forgotten drawers, dig through dusty boxes, and uncover something that would change the entire course of this story. And let me tell you, life hides its secrets in the smallest details. As I walked back to my little studio, where my saxophone sat in silence, I realized that the door my daughter slammed shut wasn't the end. It was a transition. Have you noticed how often what feels like defeat is actually the beginning of a rebirth? That's what this was. I didn't know how, but I sensed the melody wasn't finished. And that intuition whispered to me, maybe, hidden in the dusty pages of my past, lay the key to turning this game around. Back in my studio, the silence felt louder than any music I had ever played. Between worn walls and scattered memories, my saxophone rested in the corner, as if it too had given up. Strange, how the instrument that had always been the voice of my soul now seemed as quiet as I was. The pain didn't need words. It echoed through every still object around me. Silence can be deafening, and that day it was. More than humiliation, it was the betrayal of watching my family ties crumble before my eyes. I looked at the saxophone and remembered nights when it lulled Mason to sleep. I'd play soft notes, gentle melodies, and he would drift off peacefully. I remembered Ella spinning around the living room, laughing, dancing to my improvised tunes. Each memory was sweet but carried a bitter edge. What if those were the last? What if my daughter erased me completely from their lives? That's when dignity is tested, when despair tempts you, but you must cling to the hope of freedom. Funny how family has the power to lift us up or crush us down. When there's respect, everything blooms. When there's contempt, life loses its color. Have you ever lived through that? Loving someone only to be treated like you don't exist? It's like playing music for an audience that plugs its ears. The humiliation isn't only in the act itself, but in the coldness with which it's done. That silence taught me one thing. My revenge couldn't be loud. It had to be built step by step, with patience and intelligence. I placed my hands on the instrument, but couldn't bring myself to play. A saxophone is an extension of a musician's soul. To play it then would have been like tearing the wound wider. So I sat in my wooden chair and let my mind wander. Pain has a way of forcing us to look into corners of life we had long forgotten. And that's when, gazing at a dusty shelf of old sheet music, something caught my attention. It was as if the past itself was calling me back. Let me pause for a moment. Have you ever tried to deal with your pain by digging up memories from the past? Sometimes an old photograph, a forgotten letter, or even a worn-out school notebook can bring answers you can't seem to find in the present. In my case, it was the sheet music, silent guardians of my story. I could have just closed the shelf and walked away, but something inside me whispered, "There lies a key. Open it." And when life whispers like that, you have to listen. After all, the education of the soul doesn't just come from new books, but from old memories too. I pulled down a box that felt heavier than it really was. Placing it on the table, I knew I wasn't just about to open papers, but a part of myself. Emotion took over. It was as if every page carried a fragment of my dignity written in musical notes. I thought of the years I fought to turn music into livelihood, to turn sound into education, to turn effort into respect. And then it struck me. Maybe that box held more than memories. Maybe it held the beginning of my silent revenge. As I lifted the lid, my heart pounded like the beat of a bass drum. Have you ever felt that? That chill in your stomach before a discovery? That's exactly what it was. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew it wouldn't just be nostalgia. Life has its ironies. Just when you think everything's over, it hands you a clue, a sign, a hidden note in the middle of the chaos. And that's exactly what happened. Between the yellowed pages, something unexpected slipped to the floor. When that heavy box opened, it wasn't just dust that escaped. It was an entire lifetime of memories. Among folded scores, lyrics scribbled on bar napkins, and forgotten gig contracts, something different appeared. A time-worn envelope slid out. I knelt to pick it up, and a shiver ran down my spine, as if life itself were handing me a brand new composition to perform. Inside, I found not only registered pieces, but also copyright contracts, and, to my surprise, the deed to a property I had inherited from my father. There it was, something Victoria never knew. For years I had kept those documents quietly. I had chosen to live simply, without flaunting, without turning every achievement into a spectacle. I always believed that true dignity doesn't need a spotlight. It shows itself in silence, in how you treat your family, in the respect you build day by day. But seeing those pages brought mixed emotions, pride in my story, and at the same time, a bitter sting in realizing that even so, I had been humiliated by my own daughter. Holding the deed in my hands, I thought of my father, who worked his whole life as a carpenter. He didn't know jazz, didn't understand improvisation, but he understood values. "Son, more important than leaving behind a house is leaving behind an education," he used to say. And how those words echoed at that moment. I had done my part. I invested in Victoria's education, paid for expensive schools, gave her opportunities I never had, and yet she chose betrayal. denying me the chance to see my grandchildren. That's when revenge stops being petty and becomes justice, not to destroy, but to teach. As I read through the contracts again, I realized I was staring at a forgotten treasure. Royalties still trickling in month after month. Rights to compositions recorded by artists my grandchildren might not even know, and proof that my struggle had not been in vain. I thought to myself, if life is made of notes, this is the moment when the music changes key. And I realized something worth sharing with you. Often the answers to our conflicts are already in our hands, buried not by fate, but by neglect or fear. Maybe just like me, you too have a yellowed envelope waiting to be opened. I paused for a few seconds, struck by the irony. My daughter had denied me, my grandchildren, thinking she held power over me. But looking at those papers, I realized I was the one holding the final word. And here's some practical advice. Always organize your documents, your story, your memories. Keep a folder with everything that represents your achievements, not just material ones, but emotional ones too. A diploma, a letter, a photo, a deed. Because when the winds of betrayal blow through your family, it's that arsenal of dignity that keeps you standing. What amazed me most was that as I reread those contracts, an idea started gaining rhythm inside me. It was like a melody rising on its own, ready to be played on life's stage. I realized I didn't need revenge fueled by anger. I needed revenge fueled by intelligence. True revenge doesn't destroy. It shows the other with clarity the value they dismissed. And in that moment, I saw the perfect stage. The courthouse, a sober, silent place where words carry weight, where signatures turn into destiny. That would be the place of my liberation in front of witnesses. Now picture this with me. Have you ever felt like the universe handed you the exact chess piece at the exact time? That's what it felt like. Victoria thought she had me cornered, but she didn't know I still had a queen hidden on the board. Isn't that how life works? When someone underestimates your story, they forget about the chapters they've never read. I rose from that chair in my studio with a conviction I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer just a grandfather wounded by humiliation. I was a man ready to turn pain into a lesson, silence into music, rejection into freedom. I was never a man of courtrooms or formalities. I spent my life on stages, in dimly lit bars, letting my saxophone speak for me. But in that moment, holding the deed and contracts, I knew the music of my revenge needed a different stage. And so I decided the courthouse would be my theater, a solemn place where every signed word becomes destiny. There would be no improvisation, only firm notes etched in ink. That decision filled me with an emotion I hadn't felt in years, the thrill of being in control. I scheduled the meeting. I called my children, including Victoria, and told them I needed to set my works and assets in order. I chose neutral words on purpose. Experience had taught me, if you want to teach a lesson, never announce your revenge ahead of time. Let the other person believe they're in control. That contrast is what makes the impact unforgettable. It's like in music. If every note is loud, the audience grows numb. But if you play softly and then explode at the climax, that's when the whole room rises to its feet. Victoria arrived at the courthouse with the air of someone who already knew the outcome. She carried that confidence only those who think they've humiliated someone without consequence can wear. You know that look of, the victory is already mine? That was it, and I'll admit, it hurt. Not because she was confident, but because my own daughter had drifted so far from the values of family, respect, and dignity. Where were the lessons I taught her? What happened to the education I worked so hard to give? Betrayal cuts twice, once in the act itself, and again in the reminder that maybe, as a father, you failed. I had learned to turn pain into strategy. I sat calmly, took a deep breath, and allowed everyone to believe they were there for a simple division of assets. I gave no hints, showed no emotion. And here's a piece of advice I'll leave you with. Never reveal your next move when life pushes you into a power game within your own family. If you're facing humiliation, don't react on impulse. Plan, wait, organize. Sometimes silence is the prelude to a resounding victory, and it's not empty revenge, it's liberation, the kind that comes when you choose intelligence over fury. While Victoria smiled, convinced she would be the main beneficiary, I watched her quietly. I remembered when she was a little girl, running barefoot through the house, her hair a mess, laughing at everything. Emotion hit me without warning. How had that innocent child grown into a woman capable of denying her own father the right to see his grandchildren? The answer is harsh but true. The lessons we teach are seeds, but not all of them take root. That's where life steps in. Life teaches what we at home sometimes cannot. And see the irony. There I was, sitting in front of my children, ready to prove that dignity isn't improvised. I, who had been humiliated countless times on cheap stages, playing to people who barely listened, now had the chance to turn family humiliation into a symphony of justice. The courthouse would be the stage, the documents my sheet music, and my voice, steady and calm, the lead instrument. A song of liberation was beginning to play, and deep down, I knew no revenge would ever be more powerful than one disguised as a lesson. But the beauty of it all was that I wasn't only about to teach Victoria, I was about to teach myself. Because no matter how much we think we've already learned, life insists on testing us again. And I realized that my greatest victory wouldn't be over my daughter, but over the wounded man inside me, the one who wanted to scream, who wanted to return humiliation with humiliation. I silenced him, and in his place, I stood as a father who sought respect, not cheap revenge. It was a delicate game, and the next note had yet to be played. The courthouse had a solemn, almost theatrical atmosphere. White walls, leather-bound books, the respectful silence of clerks, everything signaled this was no place for improvisation. I sat at the main table with the documents in front of me. My children gathered around, and Victoria especially seemed to radiate confidence. Her eyes gleamed, as if she could already see her prize before the judge even spoke. The betrayal that had wounded me days earlier still ached inside, but in that moment, it began to transform into fuel. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I said that over the years I had accumulated some works, assets, and instruments that now needed to be put in order. I spoke slowly, deliberately, like someone dictating a score. The emotion was there, hidden but steady. Victoria crossed her arms and smirked as if to say, finally he's admitting it's time to hand me the baton. The humiliation she had inflicted seemed to have fed her arrogance. It's strange how family, when poisoned by pride, creates dangerous illusions. Respect fades, dignity evaporates, and all that's left is a game of power. Then I unveiled the first part. I declared that I intended to divide my royalties among my children. I spoke of contracts for songs recorded by artists they didn't even know, and mentioned the rare instruments I had collected over the decades. With each sentence, I saw Victoria relax further into her chair. She even fixed her hair, as if victory were already hers. My revenge wasn't complete yet, but I could already feel the weight of liberation building. It was like hearing the introduction of a melody that promised a breathtaking chorus. I looked at each of them and continued. In addition, I want to include the apartment downtown, which once belonged to my father and which I consider part of our family history. At that moment, Victoria could barely hide her broad smile. I watched her and thought, how blinding pride can be. She didn't realize this was only a partial reveal, the first layer of a score still full of surprises. Like a musician who plays the main theme but saves the improvisation for later in the show. The audience thinks they've heard it all, but the best part is yet to come. And let me open a parenthesis for you. How many times in your life have you shown others only the surface, without revealing your true strength? That isn't manipulation, it's strategy. It's knowing the right time to show your cards when you're facing a betrayal and humiliation within your family. You need to learn to measure what you reveal. Respect isn't always earned through endless words, but through the wisdom of waiting for the right moment. Just like in a good book, it's the suspense that keeps the reader hooked until the very last page. While Victoria smiled, my other children seemed more cautious. I noticed some glances of surprise, others of doubt, but all of them believed the meeting was already over. Assets divided, each would get their share. End of story. The dignity I had lost the day I was cast out of my daughter's home was being rebuilt right there. Not through blind revenge, but through the quiet strength of realizing I still had the power to conduct the music of this family. The partial reveal was only the introduction, and as every musician knows, the introduction is never the strongest part of the song. So, while the notary organized his notes and Victoria leaned back in her chair, satisfied, I stayed silent. It wasn't yet time to show my final card. It was time to let the expectation grow. Because in life, as in music, it's not the opening chord that defines the impact of a performance, but the climax. And I knew the climax was still to come. The serious look on my face began to make her uneasy, even though I hadn't said a word. And it's exactly in that tension, in that pause before the drop, that the melody of justice prepares to explode. After my opening remarks, the courthouse sank into a heavy silence. Everyone thought the meeting was done, assets divided, everyone satisfied, and that was that. But I had saved the true final note for the right moment, and that moment had come. The notary, a middle-aged man with round glasses, adjusted the papers in front of me and asked me to read aloud the additional clause I had prepared. I took a deep breath. My heart pounded, but alongside it came a steady calm, the kind of calm that only comes when dignity itself becomes your armor. I opened the envelope carefully and read, projecting my voice so that every word echoed through the room. My daughter Victoria will only be entitled to her share if she allows my grandchildren to spend time freely with their grandfather. Otherwise, all royalties, instruments, and material assets will go to a foundation for underprivileged young musicians, so they too may find in music what I once found, freedom. As soon as I finished, the silence broke into a hushed murmur, like the sound of an unexpected chord no one could ignore. Victoria's reaction was immediate. The smile that had once lit up her face vanished, as if ripped away by force. Her eyes widened, and for a few seconds she seemed unable to believe what she had just heard. It was as if the humiliation she had imposed on me weeks earlier was now reflected back onto her, right there in front of everyone. The revenge wasn't in destroying her, but in the mirror. She was now feeling, in public, the very weight of what she had made me feel, in private, and the impact was devastating. Have you ever noticed how life has a way of flipping roles? One day you're the accused, the next you're the judge. One day you swallow the betrayal, the next you're the one delivering the sentence. That morning, I learned that true justice isn't vindictive, it's educational. The clause I had written wasn't meant to humiliate my daughter, but to teach her, to show her that respect and family are not improvised like random notes, but cultivated like a symphony. And that's what I want you to take with you. Every time someone wounds you, ask yourself if your response will simply destroy or if it will also teach. Victoria tried to react. She choked on a few words, but her voice wavered. Her hand trembled as she reached for her purse, as if searching for some invisible support. Everyone present, my other children, the notary, the staff, watched in absolute silence. And here's a lesson I'll never stop repeating. The deepest humiliation doesn't come when someone yells at you, but when the silence of the audience reveals that the mask has fallen. In that instant, I realized the depth of my decision. The clause wasn't just a legal technicality, it was the summary of a life built on values that could never be bought. As Victoria struggled to compose herself, I kept speaking. I said that my grandchildren, Mason and Ella, had the right to grow up with their family's story, with their roots, with the music that had carried generations. I said that dignity is not an inheritance written on paper, but something lived in daily life. Education isn't just school, I told her, looking her in the eye. Education also means letting your children learn by example the value of respecting their elders. Each phrase landed like a heavy chord, impossible to ignore. The emotion filled not only me, but the entire room. In that moment, I realized something I must share with you. When we set clear boundaries, we stop being prisoners of betrayal and humiliation. Have you ever thought about writing your own life clauses? I don't just mean legal documents, but non-negotiable principles. For example, I will never allow myself to be disrespected in my own home, or I will not let the pursuit of money destroy my family's bonds. These invisible clauses act as guides, and when lived out firmly, they bring freedom. Because in the end, the most powerful revenge is to live according to what you truly believe. Victoria, at last, couldn't hold back her tears. They ran silently, smudging the carefully applied makeup on her face. And in that contrast, the scene gained even more power. The woman who had once denied me the right to see my grandchildren was now begging, with her eyes, for a second chance. Life, once again, showing its irony. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to impose anything by force. All it took was one clause, one line written with courage and clarity, for the melody to shift completely. Right there, before everyone, humiliation turned into justice, and justice into a lesson. But there was still one final note to be played. The silence in the courthouse hung like a pause in music before the climax. Victoria wept. My other children stared in shock, and the notary kept his eyes fixed on the papers, waiting for my next word. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. The surprise clause had opened the door to something bigger, not just an inheritance dispute, but a redefinition of values within my family, and in that suspended measure, I prepared to raise my voice once more. As soon as the words of the clause echoed through the courthouse, the air shifted. Until then, Victoria had carried herself like the star of the show. The smile, the confidence, the air of superiority. It all collapsed under the weight of one simple condition: letting her children be with their grandfather. That was the moment the collapse began. Her eyes, once steady, turned into a storm of tears. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked halfway through, as if her throat were blocked by the weight of humiliation. The daughter who had thrown me out of her home was now facing the direct consequence of her betrayal. Have you ever noticed how fragile pride really is? It looks like an impenetrable wall, but a single crack is enough to make the whole thing crumble. Victoria had always believed she controlled the narrative. In her mind, cutting me off from my grandchildren was a final, irreversible act. But when she saw that the revenge I planned wasn't rooted in hatred, but in quiet justice, the truth broke through. Right there, in front of everyone, she discovered that respect is not optional, it is required. And when respect is abandoned, life has a way of collecting the debt. Victoria buried her face in her hands and sobbed openly. Her cries echoed through the courthouse, breaking the solemnity of the room. I didn't need to say a word. The silence of those watching was already a verdict in itself. And here's an important lesson. Often the greatest teaching isn't in the speech, but in the scene. When someone faces the consequences of their own choices, learning happens naturally, like a practical class taught by life itself. I didn't need to humiliate my daughter. She humiliated herself by realizing the weight of her actions. My other children sat stunned. Some lowered their eyes. Others watched with visible discomfort. It was like witnessing a play where the lead actor forgets their lines and falters on stage. The emotion in the room was tangible. I could see on every face a mixture of shock, respect, and even a quiet relief, because justice was being served in an elegant way. No shouting, no violence, only the power of words. The dignity I had lost weeks earlier was being rebuilt, brick by brick, in front of the very people who had witnessed my downfall. Victoria, through her tears, tried to persuade me to change my mind. She said she regretted it, that she hadn't thought clearly, that she had been carried away by anger. But I knew those words came from desperation in the moment. And here's something I want to share with you. True remorse isn't born in the height of humiliation, but in the silence of reflection. Revenge that brings freedom doesn't seek only tears, it seeks transformation. That's why I stayed firm, holding my saxophone in my hands as if it weren't just an instrument, but a lifetime of choices, sacrifices, and lessons. As she broke down in tears, I felt something stir inside me, a mixture of pain and compassion, because behind the grown woman was still the little girl I once held in my arms, the daughter who once called me her hero. Family relationships carry that paradox. They can be the stage for betrayal and humiliation, yet also the source of our sweetest memories. And it was in that contrast that I found the strength not to give in. I had learned that respect cannot be bargained in the middle of tears. Respect must be cultivated every day, not begged for in desperation when the rope tightens. And here's a practical piece of advice. When someone who once humiliated you is now crying in front of you, don't mistake emotion for change. Tears may be real, but true transformation is only proven over time. It's like a tree. Planting the seed isn't enough. You have to see if it takes root. And roots, my friend, don't form overnight. So hold on to your dignity as your priority. Don't rush to forgive just because a tear falls. Wait for the fruit to ripen. That waiting is what guarantees that liberation is real, not an illusion. The entire courthouse seemed suspended in time. Victoria sobbed. People watched, and I, in silence, held my saxophone. In that instant, I realized the humiliation I had suffered was being reversed, not through cruel revenge, but through poetic justice. It was as if life's music had returned to the right key, but there was still something left to be said. One final phrase that would close that scene not as revenge, but as an eternal lesson. I knew I had to raise my voice, and I was ready to deliver a sentence that would echo forever in the memory of everyone present. I lifted my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the silence reign for a few seconds. Musicians know this. Silence is sometimes more powerful than the loudest note. Everyone waited, tense, for what I would say. Victoria sobbed uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking, while Mason and Ella watched me with watery eyes, not fully understanding, but sensing the gravity of the moment. That's when I decided to speak, not as a man wounded by betrayal, not as a humiliated father, but as someone who had learned, through life's hardships, that the truest revenge is to teach. I raised my voice and said calmly, "In music, as in life, respect cannot be improvised. It must be practiced every single day." The words echoed through the courthouse like a final chord. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. It was enough to speak the plain, raw truth for everyone to understand. Have you noticed how the right words, spoken at the right moment, can cut deeper than any sword? That sentence wasn't only for Victoria, but for everyone in the room. A reminder that dignity is not something you ask for when it's convenient, but something you build daily. At that moment, Mason ran to me, his little arms wrapped around my legs, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. Moments later, Ella followed, hugging me tightly. That scene was the true triumph. My grandchildren's embrace showing, without speeches, that family could still be saved. It was as if liberation came not from the claws, not from the courthouse, but from the sincere hug of two children who saw in their grandfather something their mother had tried to erase. Right then, I realized the greatest inheritance was not written on paper, but in bonds. Victoria, seeing her children clinging to me, seemed to crumble even more. Her sobs grew louder, and she finally fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. But it wasn't time to forgive. Her plea was drenched in desperation, not reflection. And here's a lesson I want to share. Don't confuse fleeting emotion with true change. When someone humiliates you, remember that real repentance is measured over time. Today's tears can be forgotten tomorrow, but consistent actions reveal whether transformation has truly taken place. I kept speaking, not to wound, but to educate. I told them all. The education I gave you was never meant to create heirs, but to create people of dignity. The greatest inheritance I can leave doesn't fit in a safe. It lives in actions. Those who don't practice respect in the family, who don't honor family bonds, don't deserve to be guardians of this story's fruits. The words came out like deep, steady notes, holding the entire harmony together. It was the kind of message I wish every parent could carry as an invisible clause in their lives. And here's something I've learned that I want to share with you. When it's your turn to deliver a sentence, whether in family, at work, or even to yourself, don't use it to unload bitterness. Use it to teach. Empty revenge only spreads more pain, but revenge that educates brings freedom. If a child, a friend, or even a co-worker betrays you, resist the temptation to pay them back in kind. Say something that will stay with them, something that forces them to reflect. It can be a simple phrase, but loaded with truth. Words like that become eternal. As I spoke, the notary sat still, but I noticed even he had tears in his eyes. The courthouse staff, used to the coldness of paperwork, paused to watch in complete silence. And that taught me something else. Our personal decisions, when made with dignity, have the power to inspire even strangers. You never know who's watching your actions, or how they might become examples. That's when I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was also proof that even after betrayal and humiliation, it's possible to turn pain into teaching. Mason and Ella, still holding on to me, were the confirmation that my sentence had fulfilled its purpose. I didn't need to say anything more. The emotion of the moment sealed the scene like a final chord, strong and undeniable. I knew that from then on, nothing would be the same. My daughter would have to choose whether to learn the lesson or remain trapped in her pride. And I, for my part, had gained something far greater, freedom from my pain. I was no longer a prisoner of betrayal or humiliation. I had turned my silence into music, my pain into a sentence, and my revenge into justice. But life, like every great piece of music, always saves one last surprise. I still had a final document to hand the notary, an addendum that would forever seal the fate of that inheritance. And as Victoria wept and my grandchildren held me tight, I was already preparing the next note, the one that would prove, beyond any doubt, that money would never be greater than the values that hold a family together. When Mason and Ella embraced me, I felt something inside me come back together. It was as if the notes that had once been out of tune in my life had finally found harmony. Their hug wasn't just a gesture of childish affection, but a silent declaration that, despite the betrayal and humiliation I had endured, there was still a chance for reconciliation, not an immediate reconciliation with Victoria, but reconciliation with the very idea of family. In that moment, I understood. True revenge does not destroy. It reveals what can still be saved. When Victoria saw the scene, she collapsed completely. Her knees hit the cold courthouse floor, and her crying turned into open lament. She stretched her arms toward me, begging me to reconsider. "Dad, please forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing," she repeated between sobs. But her words sounded like off-key notes, born not of reflection, but of desperation. That was the moment I understood the shock of reconciliation. Sometimes pride has to be shattered into pieces before the heart can begin to rebuild. And here lies an important lesson. Often, within family relationships, it is only after the fall that the real chance for change is born. Dignity isn't learned through speeches, but through consequences. Victoria, who once believed she was in control of everything, now stood before the harshest audience of all, her own children, watching her kneel before their grandfather. Have you ever witnessed something like this? Seeing the very person who humiliated you confronted with the truth in front of everyone? It's a powerful scene, loaded with emotion, because it proves that life demands respect in ways we can never predict. I looked at Victoria and felt a storm of emotions. Yes, there was pain. There was still the weight of betrayal, the memory of being thrown out of her house, but there was also a spark of compassion. After all, she was my daughter, my blood, and that is something you can never erase. Family carries that contradiction. It can wound us deeply, yet also give us the most intense moments of love. In that contrast, I realized that liberation would not come from destroying my daughter, but from making her see that life is bigger than any fleeting pride. It was then that I handed the notary the last document I had prepared, a simple but powerful addendum. I established that all my assets and musical rights would be preserved only by the children who kept alive the values of respect and family unity. Anyone who strayed from those principles would automatically lose their inheritance. The room fell silent once more. That condition wasn't just a legal clause. It was a declaration of faith in the values my father had passed on to me, values I had tried, in my own way, to pass on to the next generation. When Victoria heard it, she lifted her swollen red eyes. For the first time, her gaze no longer carried arrogance, but recognition. In that moment, she understood that it wasn't about money. It wasn't about contracts, deeds, or figures. It was about dignity, respect, and education, the very things she had ignored when she humiliated me, but which now became the key to everything. The shock of reconciliation was right there before us. This was never about inheritance, but about rebuilding bonds. And let me share something practical with you. Too often we think reconciliation means forgetting what happened, but it doesn't. True reconciliation is remembering without feeling the same pain. It's being able to look back, acknowledge the betrayal and the humiliation, and still see the lesson that grew from it. If you've lived through family conflict, know this. Reconciliation is possible, but it demands two things: firmness from the one who was hurt, and humility from the one who caused the harm. Without both, any attempt will be nothing more than a performance. As the notary recorded the final document, I saw something in Mason and Ella's eyes that moved me deeply. They didn't understand all the details, but they grasped the essence. They realized their grandfather was fighting not for money, but for them, for the right to remain present in their lives. That childlike, pure understanding meant more than any signature. Revenge had served its purpose, but unlike what many might imagine, it didn't bring me pleasure in seeing my daughter suffer. It brought me freedom, because I had finally shown that respect and family are not up for negotiation. Victoria wept, but now her tears carried something different. It wasn't only humiliation, it was the beginning of true remorse. The shock of reconciliation revealed itself when she realized there was still a way back. But that way would not be paved with quick apologies. It would have to be built with actions, day after day. And I knew the definitive transformation was still to come, like the final note of a song that, despite all its mistakes, could still end in harmony. When the notary finished reading the last addendum, the silence felt almost sacred. I realized that this was not just a legal act, but a manifesto. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see myself as the man wounded by his daughter's betrayal, nor as the humiliated grandfather denied time with his grandchildren. I saw myself as someone who, after a long journey, had finally found true freedom. And freedom, I learned, isn't about destroying through revenge. It's about planting seeds that ensure the mistake is never repeated. In that document, I had made it clear the inheritance and musical rights would remain only with those who upheld the values of unity and family respect. Whoever chose pride, indifference, or a lack of dignity would lose everything. That clause wasn't a threat, it was a guide, like a sheet of music, forcing musicians to follow the rhythm so that the melody exists. Without respect, there is no harmony. Without dignity, no inheritance has meaning. And that awareness transformed not only my daughter's life, but mine as well. Victoria, her face still streaked with tears, finally understood that this was never about money. For the first time, she realized that the true inheritance lay in the values I had spent a lifetime trying to teach: respect, education, love for family. The initial shock of humiliation gave way to a reflective silence, and that is where revenge fulfilled its purpose, not as punishment, but as a mirror. She saw, in public, that betrayal doesn't just destroy the one who suffers it, it also destroys the one who commits it. That was the beginning of her transformation. And here's something I want you to take with you. Transformation is not an event, it's a process. It doesn't happen because someone signs a paper or cries an apology. Transformation proves itself in daily life. It's in the hug given without pride, in the apology repeated through actions, not words. If you've suffered betrayal in your family, know this: you can use your pain as an instrument of destructive revenge or as a lever for liberation. The choice is yours. In my case, I chose to turn my pain into teaching, and that teaching became my legacy. When Mason and Ella hugged me, I realized the future could still be redeemed, because in the end, family is the most important stage of our lives. We can be applauded by the whole world. We can earn titles and wealth. But if there is no respect inside our home, everything loses its meaning. The greatest emotion I felt that day wasn't seeing Victoria in tears. It was realizing that my grandchildren were learning from an early age the lesson so many adults refuse to accept. Without dignity, no family can endure. The definitive transformation happened right there, in front of everyone, when I realized that revenge didn't have to be bitter. It could be firm, meaningful, and above all, educational. By tying my inheritance to respect, I was saying, more important than what I leave behind is how you choose to live from this day forward. And that's the point I want you to hold on to. Your greatest inheritance is not material, it's moral. It's not houses, cars, or bank accounts that sustain the next generations, but the weight of your example, the power of your choices, the dignity you practice every single day. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt the story had changed. Betrayal was no longer an open wound, but a scar carrying a lesson. Humiliation was no longer a shadow, but the fuel that helped me write the most important chapter of my life. And deep down, I realized that the music hadn't ended on notes of revenge, but on the grand chord of justice. The sound wasn't one of defeat, but of potential reconciliation. And that, my friend, is true liberation. Turning pain into legacy, silence into teaching, and tears into new opportunities for respect within the family. And now I ask you, how many times have you swallowed betrayal or humiliation in silence within your own family? How many times has the respect you gave not been returned in kind? Maybe you're going through something like this right now. Maybe you carry wounds no one else can see. But here's the truth. You don't have to remain a prisoner of pain. You can transform your experience into freedom. You can use every blow as fuel to teach and to leave behind a legacy of dignity. This isn't about money or inheritance. It's about values. Family only holds together when there is respect, and respect isn't something you beg for at the last minute. It's something you live out every day. So think about this. What clauses do you need to write into your own life? What is non-negotiable for you in your family relationships? Maybe it's time to set clear boundaries and show, with firmness, that dignity comes before any shallow affection. And let me challenge you. If you were in my place, what decision would you have made? Would you have the courage to tie everything you've built to the respect you deserve? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, if it sparked reflection in any way, join this community. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following stories that aren't just narratives, but true lessons of life.